The Woman Who Forgot Men. The Wyoming sky stretched wide and endless, painted in pale morning blue with streaks of silver clouds. It was the kind of sky that made a man feel small, and Daniel Hayes was no stranger to feeling small. His horse, an old bay with tired eyes, plodded down the uneven trail. Dust clung to Daniel's boots and hat brim, and the smell of leather, sweat, and sagebrush wrapped around him like a cloak. The cowboy had been riding for weeks, leaving behind towns where he never stayed long enough to be remembered. At 38, Daniel was a man who carried silence with him. He had worked cattle drives, traded horses, tended saloons for a drink or two, but nothing lasted. His parents were long gone, his brothers had scattered across the country, and the woman he once thought to marry had chosen another man. Somewhere along the years, Daniel had stopped looking for anything: land, money, or love. He thought what he wanted was quiet. But quiet has a way of turning into loneliness when it stays too long. That morning, after crossing a dry canyon, Daniel stumbled upon something unexpected. Ahead lay a hidden valley, green with meadow grass and framed by pine trees. A small creek shimmered under the sun, winding lazily through the clearing. And there, standing as stubborn as a survivor, was a cabin. Daniel reined in his horse, frowning. A cabin this deep into the wilderness? The nearest settlement was 3 days' ride. He squinted, half expecting to see smoke curl from the chimney, and sure enough, a thin gray ribbon rose into the sky. "Now who in blazes lives out here?" Daniel muttered. His horse flicked its ears but gave no answer. Curiosity tugged at him. He nudged the bay forward, boots clicking against the stirrups as they approached. The closer he came, the more signs of life he saw: a small garden plot fenced with rough-cut logs, a line of laundries strung across poles, herbs hanging to dry under the cabin's eaves. This was no abandoned shack. Someone lived here. And then he heard it, a voice. Soft, low, humming some tune without words. Daniel froze. It was the unmistakable voice of a woman. His breath caught, as though the air had turned solid. He had been weeks on the trail, months without conversation longer than a barkeep's. What'll it be? But this wasn't just any voice. It carried a melody shaped by habit, by years of singing to oneself to chase away silence. He dismounted slowly, leading his horse closer. The door creaked open, and a woman stepped out carrying an armload of firewood. She looked to be in her early 30s, with hair streaked in silver, though her face held the fullness of youth. Her skin was sun-kissed, her arms strong from labor, yet her features, sharp cheekbones, wide eyes, soft mouth, spoke of a beauty untouched by time. The firewood tumbled from her grasp. Her eyes widened, her lips parted as if she'd seen a ghost. The basket clattered to the ground, spilling logs into the dust. For a long moment, the only sound was the creek's gentle murmur. Then, in a whisper cracked with disbelief, she said, "I haven't seen a man in 17 years." Daniel blinked, caught off guard. He held his hands up, palms open in peace. "Ma'am," he said carefully, his voice deep but calm, "I mean no harm. Just passing through." But the woman's breath came fast and uneven, and suddenly, as though years of loneliness broke free all at once, she rushed forward. Before Daniel could react, her arms wrapped around him. He stiffened. Her body pressed against his, trembling, her face buried in his chest. She clung as if afraid he'd vanish like smoke. Daniel stood frozen, his calloused hands hovering awkwardly in the air. He had not been held in years, certainly not by a stranger, and never with such desperation. Finally, he lowered his arms and rested them gently against her back. Her shoulders shook as she whispered again, 17 years since I last saw anyone like you." That night, inside her cabin, Daniel learned her name, Eliza Whitlock. The cabin was small but sturdy, its walls lined with shelves of dried food, jars of berries, handmade tools. A fire burned warmly in the hearth, and the smell of stew filled the air. They sat across a rough-hewn table, and Eliza told him her story. 17 years ago, she had traveled west with her family in a wagon train. They had dreams of land and freedom. But tragedy struck when raiders attacked their camp. Her parents were killed, and Eliza fled into the wilderness with her younger sister. For a short while, they had survived together. But the mountains were unforgiving, and one bitter winter fever claimed her sister's life. Eliza had been alone ever since. "I thought of going back," she said, staring into her bowl of stew. "But where? And who would I return to? So I stayed. I built this place with my own hands. Learned to hunt, to plant, to mend. The valley gave me what I needed, except someone to talk to." Her voice cracked. "I forgot what a man's voice sounded like. Until today." Daniel listened in silence. He had seen hardship, but never like this. Loneliness was one thing, he had carried it himself, but 17 years of silence? It was unthinkable. That night, lying on the cot she prepared for him, Daniel stared at the cabin's wooden beams. Outside, the crickets sang. Inside, the faint sound of Eliza's steady breathing reminded him he wasn't alone. He thought of her words, of the way she had clung to him as though he were salvation itself. He thought of her strength, living all those years without giving up. And he thought of himself, a man who had been searching for quiet, only to find a woman who had lived in too much of it. At dawn, Daniel stepped outside to tend his horse. Eliza was already at the creek, kneeling to fill a bucket with water. She looked up as he approached, sunlight catching in her silver-streaked hair. "Daniel," she said softly, speaking his name for the first time. "Yes, ma'am." Her eyes held a fragile hope, like a flame sheltered from wind. "Are you staying?" He hesitated, glancing at the meadow, the cabin, the woman who had survived what few could. "I wasn't planning to," he admitted. "But maybe," his gaze met hers, steady and certain, "maybe I should." Eliza's lips trembled into the first true smile he had seen from her. And in that hidden valley, surrounded by wilderness and silence, Daniel Hayes realized his journey was no longer his alone. For the woman who hadn't seen a man in 17 years had found him. And the story of both their lives was only beginning. The cowboy who stayed. The days in the hidden valley unfolded slowly, marked by the rhythm of sun and creek, the sound of birds, and the quiet work of two people learning to exist side by side. For Daniel, the first mornings felt unreal. He had been used to waking in bunkhouses filled with snoring men, or under the stars with coyotes howling. Now he woke to the faint clatter of Eliza moving about the cabin, humming under her breath as she prepared breakfast. It was strange, almost unsettling, how quickly he had grown used to the comfort of another's presence. Eliza, for her part, treated him with a mixture of awe and nervousness. Sometimes she stared at him too long, as if afraid he might vanish. Other times, she avoided his gaze entirely, blushing when their hands brushed over the stew pot or the water bucket. She had been alone for so many years that every word, every glance, seemed to weigh more than it should. One afternoon, Daniel offered to mend the cabin's roof. He had noticed leaks in the rafters during a rain shower, and the cowboy in him couldn't sit idle while work needed doing. "I've managed all these years," Eliza protested, though her voice lacked firmness. Daniel only grinned. "Ma'am, I've no doubt you managed. But you've had to do the work of two. Let a man feel useful." She hesitated, then nodded. So Daniel climbed up with hammer and nails, stripping away rotten planks and replacing them with fresh ones cut from the pine trees. Eliza stood below, watching. Once, when he slipped slightly, she gasped and pressed a hand to her chest. "You'll fall," she cried. Daniel chuckled, his voice drifting down. "Takes more than a loose board to kill me. Don't worry." But Eliza did worry. "That night," she admitted softly, "I forgot what it feels like to care if someone gets hurt." Her eyes shone in the firelight, vulnerable. 17 years, Daniel. 17 years of talking to no one but myself. Now, suddenly, I find I don't want you to leave. Daniel's chest tightened. He had meant to stay only a little while. But hearing those words, he knew he was already too deep to walk away. As the days turned to weeks, Daniel and Eliza found themselves slipping into a rhythm. He hunted deer and rabbit, she dried the meat and tended the garden. He taught her how to repair tack for his horse, she showed him which herbs grew best in the valley's soil. There were moments of laughter, rare and sudden, Eliza laughing at Daniel's crooked attempts to sew, Daniel laughing when Eliza tried to mimic the rough drawl of cowboys. There were also silences, heavy and uncertain, when their eyes lingered too long, when unspoken feelings hung between them like the low clouds before a storm. One evening, after a long day, Daniel sat outside whittling wood while Eliza joined him on the porch. The sunset bathed her face in gold. "I dreamed of this," she said quietly. "Of what?" Daniel asked. "Of not being alone. Of sitting with someone. Of a man beside me." She folded her hands, her voice trembling. "When I saw you that first day, I thought maybe I'd gone mad. That I was seeing what I wanted most." Daniel turned the knife in his hand, the wood shaving curling at his boots. "You weren't dreaming, Eliza. I'm here." She met his eyes, and in them he saw both fear and hope. But the wilderness has a way of testing even the strongest souls. One morning, while checking snares deeper in the forest, Daniel found signs he hadn't expected, boot prints. Fresh ones. Not his. Not Eliza's. He crouched low, studying them. 2 men, judging by the depth and spacing. Strangers. When he returned to the cabin, his face was grim. "Eliza," he said, "we're not alone out here." Her hand stilled on the bread she was kneading. "What do you mean?" "Someone's been through the valley. 2 men, maybe more. Could be trappers. Could be worse." Eliza's face drained of color. "I thought no one ever came here. All these years, no one." Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder, steadying her. "Don't be afraid. If trouble comes, I'll see you safe." But that night, lying awake on his cot, Daniel couldn't shake the thought. He had promised safety, but he had no land, no family, no claim to this valley. What right did he have to promise her anything? Still, when dawn came, and Eliza smiled at him across the fire, Daniel knew one truth. Whether he had the right or not, he would fight to keep her safe. Because somewhere in those quiet weeks, his loneliness had been replaced by something else, something that frightened him more than the strangers in the woods. It was the slow, undeniable pull of love. The woman who chose love. The valley was no longer as quiet as before. Daniel felt it in the air, the watchful stillness of the trees, the way the birds scattered too suddenly. The boot prints he had seen were not fading. If anything, they were growing fresher each day. He kept his rifle near, even when chopping wood, and every evening he circled the cabin to check for signs of strangers. Eliza noticed the change in him. One evening, as she stirred the stew, she asked, "You're expecting them, aren't you?" Daniel didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "Men wandering this far out usually aren't looking to make friends." Her hands trembled. "I've been safe here for so long. Daniel, what if they—" He stepped forward and took her wrist gently. "Eliza, listen to me. I swore I'd keep you safe. And I will. You've carried the weight of survival 17 years alone. You don't have to carry fear by yourself anymore." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. The test came sooner than either expected. It was near dusk when 2 riders appeared at the edge of the meadow. Rough men, with long coats and hungry eyes, rifles slung carelessly across their backs. Daniel saw them first, his stomach tightening. "Eliza," he whispered, pulling her away from the window. "Stay inside. But no arguments." His tone was firm but gentle. He stepped outside, hat low over his brow, rifle resting easy in his hands. The strangers reined in their horses near the garden fence. "Well, I'll be," the taller one drawled. "Didn't expect to find company out here." His eyes flicked toward the cabin. Company with a woman, no less. Daniel's grip on the rifle tightened. "You've found it. Now state your business." The second man smirked. "Business? Ain't much business this far from town. We're drifters. Looking for food. Maybe shelter." His gaze lingered too long on the cabin door. Daniel stepped forward, his stance solid as stone. "Food, I can spare. Shelter, I can't. You'll take your meal and be on your way." The men exchanged looks. One chuckled. "You talk mighty bold, Cowboy. But there's 2 of us, one of you." Daniel's eyes hardened. "One's all it takes." Something in his voice, calm, deadly sure, made the men pause. After a tense silence, they accepted a sack of dried meat Daniel tossed their way. Muttering under their breath, they rode off into the trees. Only when the sound of hooves faded did Daniel let his shoulders relax. Inside, Eliza had watched from the crack of the door. When he came back in, she rushed forward, clutching his arm. "You faced them down like—" her voice trembled. "Like someone who's been protecting people all his life." Daniel set the rifle aside and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Truth is, Eliza, I've spent most of my life protecting nothing but my own hide. But for you, I'd stand against an army." Her lips parted, her breath shaky. "Why? Why for me?" The question hung heavy. Daniel could have looked away, could have hidden behind humor or silence. But he was tired of silence. "Because," he said simply, "I love you." For a heartbeat, she stared at him as though she hadn't heard right. Then tears brimmed in her eyes. "Daniel, I don't even remember how to love. 17 years, I forgot what it felt like. I thought that part of me was gone." He cupped her face gently. "It isn't gone. It's been waiting. Just like I've been waiting, though I didn't know it." Her tears spilled over, but this time they were not of sorrow. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his chest. "When I saw you that first day, I hugged you out of desperation. But now," she lifted her eyes, shining with new courage, "now I hug you because I choose to." Daniel pulled her close, holding her as though the world outside no longer mattered. The days after that were different. Where once there had been caution and hesitance, now there was certainty. Daniel and Eliza worked side by side, not just to survive, but to build something together. They laughed more, spoke more, dreamed more. And one quiet evening, under the glow of firelight, Daniel took her hand. "Eliza Whitlock," he said softly, "you've lived 17 years without anyone by your side. You don't deserve another day of loneliness. I can't offer riches or a fine house, but I can offer my name, my heart, and every day I've got left. Will you marry me?" Her breath caught, her eyes wide. For a moment, silence filled the cabin. Then she smiled, a smile bright enough to chase away 17 years of darkness. "Yes, Daniel," she whispered. "I will." They married themselves, in the meadow by the creek, with only the wind and the birds as witness. Daniel carved 2 simple rings from pine wood, slipping one onto her finger with hands that trembled not from fear, but from joy. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, Eliza felt the weight of years lift from her heart. She was no longer the woman who hadn't seen a man in 17 years. She was a wife, a partner, and no longer alone. Daniel, once a lonely cowboy, had found what he never thought to seek, a home, not built of wood, but of love. That night, as they sat together by the fire, Eliza leaned against him and whispered, "17 years I waited without knowing what for. Now I know. I was waiting for you." Daniel kissed her hair, his voice steady and sure. "And I was wandering all my life, Eliza. Wandering until I found where I belonged. Here. With you." The fire crackled, the creek whispered beyond the walls, and for the first time in decades, the valley was no longer silent. Because love had returned to it, love strong enough to end 17 years of loneliness.